You've shown me on the graph that you've just shown the escalation ladder, you can call it, and where we are now. What is the most probable next thing that you think happens with this war?
The biggest thing I'm worried about is a mass casualty attack against American troops or American civilians.
Where?
Against American troops in the Middle East, but I'm specifically worrying about a barrage of ballistic missiles against our naval ships in the Gulf of Oman. So Iran is showing through the targeting that it's already been doing in the last week and a half, an exquisite ability to precisely target. And we don't know for sure they're able to track the movement of our naval ships in the Gulf of Oman, or they're getting help with either from the Chinese or the Russians in doing that. But I'm specifically worried that as this escalates, they've just closed the strait, they've just closed the Red Sea. If we keep going forward, and we'll find out if Trump will pull back or not, but if we keep going forward, one of the big things I'm concerned about this week, next week, would be an attack on a ship. And I think it would be a barrage attack. The second thing I'm concerned about is because we are now literally threatening ground occupation. That's the biggest risk factor for suicide terrorism in my 25 years of studying suicide attacks. We haven't talked about that, Stephen. And the reason we haven't talked about it is because we were pretty far away from the big risk factor of how you start a big suicide terrorist campaign. That is now changing. I've talked to my Substack about this. Glad to talk to you about it now. But I'm concerned about a mass casualty attack against Americans. This could be against an American airliner. It could be against, Americans on a commercial airliner. This could be against Americans, say businessmen in Aqaba. So you might know there have been attacks recently in Aqaba, which is this really lovely resort town. I've never been there. And the fact is, there are American businessmen moving all around the Middle East now to build these pipelines. And so I can imagine there being terrorist attacks against the hotels that they're staying at. The German and British embassies have just ordered their evacuation. State Department has issued an advisory over the weekend for Americans to start leaving the region. But I'm concerned about terrorist attack because threatening or actually doing ground control, controlling pieces of homeland territory, is the biggest risk factor for suicide terrorism. That's what causes people more than anything else to strap on bombs to kill others while they're killing themselves. So before we explain in detail, so when you say, Stephen, what I'm looking for in the next few weeks, yes, I'm seeing the spiral of escalation now occurring. It's a two-sided spiral. It's not just President Trump. Iran is escalating here as much as Trump, if not more. And in this spiral of escalation, there could be a mass casualty attack, either against our troops or against American civilians. And the American civilian attack could be anywhere in the world. It could be in Indonesia. It could be London. It could be anywhere. And if that mass casualty event happens, I think what you're going to see is that this is likely going to cause that division we just discussed here in America, support for the war, to harden even more. And you're going to get, though, intense support for continuing the war now to stop mass casualty attacks by Iran in the future.
So you have spent some of your career studying terrorist attacks and, I guess, suicide terrorist attacks.
Specifically, yes.
Give me a view into the research, the work you've done there. You've written a book on it. Two books on it.
Yep.
And then ladder me up to how that's relevant to the moment we're in now.
So shortly after 9/11, remember, America was hit with a terrorist attack here in New York, the World Trade Center, the Pentagon. Nearly 3,000 Americans died that day. I wanted to understand why. And I wanted to understand more. The more I studied it, I noticed that 9/11 was a suicide attack. It wasn't just a terrorist attack. So I started to collect what became the first complete data set of all suicide attacks around the world. I did this at the University of Chicago. I did this with a few research assistants, basically work study students. The suicide terrorism, the reason I studied it, Stephen, was because it's the lung cancer of terrorism. Suicide attacks kill more people in the category of terrorism than all the other different kinds of terrorism combined. The suicide attacks are the biggest killer. It's like lung cancer. We have other kinds of cancers, but lung cancer is the biggest killer. And what is the key risk factor for the lung cancer of suicide terrorism? It's military combat presence on territory the terrorists prize.
So with suicide terrorism, is it hard to stop? Because, we can intercept missiles that are coming over pretty well, it seems, but suicide terrorism seems to be a completely different type of challenge.
Suicide terrorism is like turning a person into a precision-guided weapon. Because literally, nothing can better identify the most vulnerable point in a crowd, the most vulnerable point in a building, the exact split second to set off the explosive better than a human.
And how does the US, for example, you're saying two things. You're saying that attack could happen in the United States, but also it doesn't have to. It could happen anywhere in those regions where there's a high density of Americans or Westerners,
That's right.
Theoretically.
That's right.
Because, the Americans could say, well, we're not going to let in anybody from those regions. We're going to get more diligent with passport checks, whatever.
That will happen after the first. Let's, God forbid, I hope I'm wrong, Stephen, but if and when that first attack happens, you're going to see all that come out.
You're going to see what come out.
You're going to see all the idea of what can we do? Can we do passport checks? Can we do X or Y? This is right after 9/11. Similar thing happened. Let's hope nothing that large would happen. But let me just further explain that when I compiled that database, and it made a specific prediction. It predicted then that if we invaded and occupied Iraq, we would touch off the largest suicide terrorist campaign in modern times.
What is it about invading their country in particular versus bombing their country in particular that causes suicide terrorist attacks from your research? Like, what is it? Because bombing them from the sky is killing people.
It's not the killing people part of this that matters. It's the political control part that comes with the ground forces. So the reason to use the ground forces is to impose political control. So that's not just killing people, Stephen.
So the reason why America put in ground forces
is to get political control. And that political control means the group controlled doesn't control its way of life.
It's this sort of seen as a deeper violation. Is that ultimately what it is?
It's a deeper violation that is not in control of the local population. So when we put in ground forces in Afghanistan after we toppled the Taliban with air power, by the way, but we don't get much suicide attacks in Afghanistan till we start pouring in ground forces in Afghanistan. That comes after we topple the Taliban. So we topple the Taliban in fall 2021. And then we get the suicide terrorism starting several years later in Afghanistan. It's because that's when we're putting in the ground forces.
So Donald Trump has just posted on Truth Social a few hours ago saying every time Iran kills an American soldier, they will pay for that killing many times over. This directive has been passed on to the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs, and his other military leader. And obviously this is in response to losing an American life. And he's very actively tweeting as we speak about the war. Tweet after tweet after tweet after tweet on Truth Social. It begs the question. I mean, I just don't know. What is there an achievable end game or off ramp here that restores the free shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, but also allows the United States to retract without appearing to have suffered a strategic defeat?
No, Stephen, there is not an achievable off ramp. That ship sailed first when President Trump decided in the first week in March not to declare. He could have declared, my advice at that point, first week in March, was to declare victory and walk away. To say all you wanted to do was teach Iran a lesson. You killed the supreme leader, a bunch of other leaders. Now let's go back to negotiate about Iran's nuclear program. He did not do that. When I was with you in April, I was giving a different advice. That advice then was to militarily contain Israel. That advice was to keep a lid. Israel was moving into Lebanon, doing other things, keep a lid on Israel militarily. President Trump has taken these ideas, and I'm not saying because I said them, but he's taken those ideas months too late. If you look at what I think President Trump might think, he is trying to militarily contain Israel right now. With the MOU, I do think he tried to declare victory and walk out. But the problem here, Stephen, is that these are now a day late and a dollar short. They're just not good enough. So if you wanted to get back to the negotiating track, what exactly are you going to offer Iran to come back to the table at this point? The same MOU say, oh, sure, we're going to honor the MOU that we already signed and then we violated over and over and over. So that's not credible.
So is this the forever war?
No, we're not yet in the forever war stage.
But you said there's no way out.
The way out would be if the midterms come and the Democrats win either the House or the House and the Senate, and they shut down the money for the war.
Oh,
that is a way out.
Oh, they can do that?
Yes, that's what happened in Vietnam.
They can shut down the money for the war.
They can shut down that's what Congress did. Yes, Congress has the power. It doesn't use it very often. The last time it did this was in 1974. The reason as I showed you on that escalation ladder, I said there is a stage 5 of forever war. We're not at a forever war yet. What would be a forever war would be where that will come. And the reason I'm defining the escalation period between now and the midterms is the most crucial period right now. This is going to determine everything. And what's going to determine the outcome of the next few months is, can America open the Strait of Hormuz physically? What could easily happen between now and the midterms is President Trump tries to open the Strait of Hormuz, or he allows Iran, by the way, he pulls back. He could actually pull back. Either way, at this point, Stephen, there's a good chance he will lose in the midterms, meaning that the Republicans will lose one or both houses in Congress. And if that happens, then whoever takes over control will be a Democrat. They'll be hotly anti-war. And there will be great efforts here to shut down the war, meaning shut down the money for the war. So it's always about the money.
I need to get an understanding of the role. So this sort of link between the midterms, the money, and then the war. So the midterms are going to change who's in Congress.
Yes.
And then the people
who controls it.
And the people in Congress, they decide how much money the military get.
They decide whether or not they can pass laws, and this is what happened in 1974, to prevent money from being spent on the war.
And Trump can't overdo that.
He can try to work around it. There can be then Supreme Court cases and so forth and so on.
So even if Democrats win the midterms and try to halt the war, Trump could bypass them because he holds massive constitutional advantages as commander-in-chief. He can simply veto any war powers resolution or funding restriction passed by Congress, which would then require an incredibly difficult 2/3 supermajority in both chambers to override. Furthermore, mirroring the arguments of almost every president since Richard Nixon, Trump could evoke his Article 2 constitutional authority, claiming he has the inherent power to defend America's interests and troops without needing legislative approval. Finally, even if Congress refuses to authorize new funding, the president can use emergency transfer authorities and creative accounting to shuffle existing Pentagon budget funds to keep the military operations running in the short term.
You've just defined a constitutional crisis. Congress will think it has the power. President Trump will think he has the power. That is what is a constitutional crisis. And that's why these midterms, as my don't mean to say it quite in this context, but as you know, I have a book coming out, Our Own Worst Enemies. The preface is called The Most Dangerous Elections in Our Lifetimes. That is why this election coming up will be the most dangerous election in our lifetime, because the tensions now are growing on top of all that. They're not calming down those waters. The Iran war is making all these worse. And what you just read is the tension here that could well come, because the Democrats are not going to want there to be a forever war. And they're likely fight really hard once they control once they control one or both houses of Congress. President Trump will want to fight really hard for his legacy and his domestic agenda, including deportations, including ICE. So this will all come together. These will not be compartmentalized, separate issues as we get into the midterms. That's why I'm saying that we're coming, the midterms. We're not heading to a future where it's just about what happens to military bases overseas. It's just about what happens to ships overseas and what's happened in Hormuz. These lines, the domestic political violence in the United States, I call this the era of violent populism, and the growing tensions in the country over the Iran war. These two lines, the domestic crisis and the international crisis, are about to come together. And as I told my research team in the summer of 2024 in talks I gave in Chicago, my nightmare, they asked me what my nightmare scenario was. This was in the fall of 2024. And I said, my nightmare scenario is we have an international crisis at the same time as we have an election. In the fall of 2024, we really didn't have that. Now we do. And this is, we're heading into the fall of 2026. And this was always my nightmare scenario.
Why? What does that mean? What are those two things colliding?
Those two things colliding start to look like the 1960s.
And what happened in the 1960s?
The 1960s, we had mass demonstrations. We had anti-war violence. We had anti-war terrorism with the Weather Underground. We had multiple assassinations that occurred. Martin Luther King, it was Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. The convention in Chicago, there was just mass demonstration. Mayor Daley in Chicago gave a shoot to kill order. I already mentioned to you the Weather Underground string of bombs that they set off. So what we faced in the 1960s was the collision of domestic political tension with an unpopular war. That's how you got the chaos of the 1960s. I have a whole chapter in the book about the 1960s and why it was so particularly intense.
So do you think that Trump is likely to lose the midterms as things stand? Do you think the Republicans are likely to lose?
Here's the thing. If we have a mass casualty attack, this will increase the odds of Trump and the Republicans winning in the midterms. And I think if we have a world economic crisis without the mass casualty attack, then I think it's likely that the Republicans will lose in the midterms.
Okay.
So I think we have, the reason I can't give you a clean answer to this, which I know people want, they would, because we have multiple specific issues here that are now as part of the spiraling violence. Steve.
And three months isn't awful long.
It's a long time, because that mass casualty attack could happen in October. And it doesn't have to be command directed by Iran. It can occur, the mass casualty attack against Americans can occur because it's an inspired attack. The supreme leader is issuing statements that sound almost like Baghdadi, that was the leader of ISIS, issuing statements to encourage inspired attacks. That was the suicide attacks in Paris in November 2015 that killed over 100 people. That was San Bernardino. So we saw leaders inspire attacks before, and the supreme leader's statements are eerily close to the same words.
Is the current US air campaign